Alright, let's go. Number 10. The Longyou Caves. In June 1992, a farmer named Wu and I, living near the village of Xianbeikun in Zhejiang Province, China, decided to drain a pond that had sat on his land for as long as anyone could remember. He rented a pump. 5 days later, as the water level dropped, he found himself looking not at the bottom of a pond, but at the entrance to a stone chamber. He called his neighbors. They began draining the adjacent ponds. There were 24 of them. The Longyou Caves are a complex of artificial sandstone caverns, covering an area of approximately 30,000 square meters. The largest individual chamber measures 32 meters in length, 26 meters in width, and stands 15 meters tall. The walls, ceilings, and floors of every chamber are covered with parallel chisel marks arranged in a consistent 60-degree pattern. Every single chamber, the same angle, the same spacing, executed across 30,000 square meters of carved sandstone with no variation. To put this in perspective, carving 30,000 square meters of stone to this level of uniformity, while managing drainage, ventilation, and structural integrity, would have required an estimated 1,000 workers operating for 6 years. That is the logistical output of a state-level organization, a government, a military apparatus, a centralized command structure capable of deploying and directing a small army of skilled laborers across 2 decades of continuous underground work. But here's where the standard explanation falls apart. There is no historical record, not a single document, inscription, or administrative record from any Chinese dynasty acknowledges the construction of the Longyou Caves. No decree ordering their construction. No logistics records accounting for the million cubic meters of excavated stone. No burial records for the workers who must have died during construction. No dedication inscriptions. Nothing. A project requiring the organizational infrastructure of a civilization, completely absent from the written record of one of the most thoroughly documented ancient civilizations on Earth. The missing stone is the detail that makes archaeologists stop. Over 1 million cubic meters of excavated material were removed from these chambers. For comparison, the stone removed from the Longyou Caves exceeds the total stone volume used to construct the Great Wall's eastern sections. That material had to go somewhere. No spoil heap has ever been located. No secondary dump site. No evidence of quarrying operations in the surrounding area. The rock was removed, and then it vanished. Chinese archaeologists, UNESCO investigators, and teams from Japanese universities have studied the site since its discovery. The consistent conclusion across 30 years of research is the same. The origin of the caves, the identity of the builders, the purpose of the construction, and the destination of the excavated material are unknown. The 60-degree chisel pattern has no parallel in Chinese archaeological tradition. The architectural proportions match no known Chinese structural form. The truly disturbing aspect isn't the scale of the project, it's the silence. A civilization capable of this left no voice. Whatever they built it for, whatever they were thorough enough to vanish completely, except for the work itself. Number 9. The Sacsayhuamán Walls. In 1534, Spanish conquistador Pedro Sancho de la Hoz stood at the base of the fortress walls above Cusco, Peru, and wrote the following in his official report to the crown. These blocks are so large and so perfectly fitted together that no knife blade can be inserted between them, yet no mortar of any kind was used in their construction. I do not know how they could have been set in place by human hands. He was looking at stones weighing between 100 and 300 metric tons each, stacked in irregular, polygonal patterns to a height of 6 meters, with seams so precise they have remained stable for 600 years through earthquakes that leveled the Spanish colonial buildings constructed on top of them. The main wall at Sacsayhuamán contains an estimated 600 individual stones. The largest single block, designated Stone JJ-01 by modern surveyors, has been measured at 8.5 meters tall, 4 meters wide, and is estimated to weigh between 150 and 200 metric tons. For context, the largest single-piece granite blocks used in the construction of the Great Pyramid of Giza weigh approximately 80 metric tons. The Sacsayhuamán stones are more than twice that mass, and they were quarried, transported, and fitted with tolerances measured in fractions of a millimeter. The quarry site at Rumicolca is located 35 kilometers from Cusco. The transport route crosses river valleys, climbs elevation changes of over 600 meters, and includes sections of terrain where no wheeled transport is possible. Engineering analyses conducted by researchers at the University of Illinois in 2012 and Oxford in 2018 attempted to model the transport logistics using Inca-era technology: ropes, log rollers, earthen ramps, and human labor. Both analyses concluded the same thing. The transport of the largest stones is physically possible, but would require sustained workforce deployments on the order of 20,000 to 30,000 workers per stone, a labor commitment exceeding the total estimated workforce of the entire Inca Empire during its height. But here's where the mystery becomes genuinely unsettling. The Inca themselves, when questioned by Spanish administrators about the construction, did not claim credit. According to 3 separate Spanish colonial records from the 1560s, Inca informants described Sacsayhuamán as the work of beings called Viracocha, creators who existed before the Inca. The Inca built upon and expanded a structure they did not build. They inherited it. The stone-fitting technique used at Sacsayhuamán, irregular polygonal masonry with no mortar, where each stone has been carved to fit its specific neighbors on multiple faces simultaneously, is seismically superior to any other construction method used before the 20th century. During the 1950 Cusco earthquake, which measured 5.5 on the Richter scale and destroyed large portions of the colonial city, the Sacsayhuamán walls were undamaged. The Spanish buildings sitting on top of their foundations were destroyed. The walls beneath survived. The question is not how the Inca built Sacsayhuamán. The question is who built it and whether the Inca were telling the truth when they said they didn't. Number 8. The Antikythera Mechanism. On October 17, 1900, sponge diver Elias Stadiadis descended to 43 meters off the coast of the Greek island of Antikythera and surfaced claiming he had seen a pile of rotting horses and dead people on the seafloor. His captain, Demetrios Kondos, dove to investigate. What Stadiadis had seen was the bronze statuary cargo of a Roman trading ship that had sunk approximately 2,100 years earlier. Among the recovered objects, amphora, bronze statues, glassware, jewelry, was a corroded bronze mass approximately the size of a large dictionary. It sat in the Athens National Archaeological Museum for 2 years before anyone noticed the gears inside it. The Antikythera mechanism contains at least 37 interlocking bronze gears. The smallest gear in the assembly has a diameter of 9 millimeters. The gear teeth are cut at a tolerance of 0.1 millimeters, a precision that was not achievable again in European clockmaking until the 14th century CE, more than 1,300 years after the mechanism was built. X-ray tomography, conducted by researchers at University College London in 2006 and Cardiff University in 2021, revealed inscriptions on the interior of the mechanism describing its functions in precise astronomical language. The mechanism tracked the Metonic cycle, the 19-year cycle aligning solar and lunar calendars; the Saros cycle, the 18-year cycle used to predict solar eclipses; the 4-year cycle of the Olympiad Games; the positions of the 5 planets then known to the Greeks; the phases of the moon, and the position of the sun relative to the zodiac. It did this simultaneously using a differential gear system, a mechanical principle that engineers consider one of the most sophisticated innovations in the history of machinery. The differential gear was not reinvented in the West until 1827 CE, when it was independently developed for use in steam-powered locomotives. But here's where the standard explanation falls apart. The mechanism is not a one-off. Cicero, writing in 65 BCE, describes a device owned by the philosopher Posidonius that reproduced the movements of the sun, moon, and 5 planets. The Roman writer Claudian, writing in 400 CE, describes a similar device. Ancient texts from Alexandria reference mechanical astronomical instruments with multiple functions. The Antikythera mechanism is not an anomaly. It is the sole surviving example of a class of instruments that was apparently manufactured across the Mediterranean world for at least 4 centuries. What happened to the tradition? Not a single other example survives. Not a partial mechanism. Not a gear fragment definitively identified as belonging to such a device. The manufacturing knowledge that produced 37 gears at 0.1 millimeter tolerance disappeared completely, and the civilization that inherited Greek knowledge, Rome, never reproduced it. The most disturbing finding of the Cardiff 2021 study is not the complexity of the front face, it is the incomplete backplate. The researchers identified mounting points and gear interfaces for a mechanism that was never installed. Components described in the inscriptions, but absent from the physical device. The Antikythera Mechanism was recovered unfinished. Somewhere, there may be the parts that complete it. Number 7. Nan Madol. In 1595, Spanish explorer Pedro Fernández de Queiroz sailed past a chain of artificial stone islands in a lagoon off the coast of Pohnpei in what is now the Federated States of Micronesia. He described what he saw as the Venice of the Pacific, a vast network of canals and artificial platforms constructed entirely from enormous basalt columns, stacked log cabin style to form walls rising up to 7.5 meters above the lagoon surface. He attempted to make contact with the inhabitants and reported that the site appeared to be abandoned. Nobody knew when it was built. Nobody knew who built it. Nan Madol covers an area of 18 square kilometers. It consists of 92 artificial islets constructed atop a coral reef by stacking prismatic basalt columns, natural hexagonal stone logs formed by ancient volcanic cooling, each column weighing between 5 and 50 metric tons. An estimated 750,000 metric tons of basalt was moved to construct the site. The nearest basalt source, the volcanic plug at Soques Rock, is approximately 30 kilometers away across open ocean. Radiocarbon dating of organic material recovered from the foundations places the construction period between 1200 CE and 1500 CE. But here's the detail that changes everything: the architectural foundation stones. The deepest layer, the first stones placed, have been dated to significantly earlier, with some foundation courses producing dates as early as 200 CE. The uppermost visible construction and the lowest buried foundations are separated by a millennium. Whatever was built first at Nan Madol was built before anything that exists today was placed on top of it. But here's where the mystery becomes genuinely disturbing. Local Pohnpeian oral tradition attributes the construction of Nan Madol to two brothers, Olesipa and Olosohpa, who arrived by canoe from a land in the west. The tradition does not describe years of labor. It describes the stones flying through the air, directed by the brothers using magic. Oral tradition is not evidence, but the engineering analysis is. The transport of 750,000 metric tons of basalt across 30 kilometers of open ocean using dugout canoes and human muscle power has no satisfactory logistical model. A 2016 analysis published in the Journal of Pacific Archaeology concluded that even with the maximum estimated population of Pohnpei during the construction period, approximately 25,000 people, the transport of materials to Nan Madol would have consumed the total available labor of the island for over 400 continuous years. There is no equivalent project in the archaeological record of any comparable island society. Nan Madol was built in a place with no agricultural hinterland, no freshwater source, and no defensive strategic value. There is no explanation for why it exists where it does. There is no explanation for how it was built by the population that had access to it. UNESCO inscribed Nan Madol as a World Heritage Site in 2016. The official designation reads, "The outstanding universal value of Nan Madol lies in its exceptional complexity and the mysteries still surrounding its origins and construction." In the formal language of the world's premier archaeological designation body, the word mysteries is followed by no further elaboration. Number 6. The Nazca Lines. In 1927, Peruvian archaeologist Toribio Mejia Zespe was hiking in the foothills above the Nazca Desert in southern Peru when he noticed that the brown desert surface had been systematically scraped to expose the lighter substrate underneath, creating lines that ran in perfectly straight trajectories across the terrain. From ground level, they appeared to be simple paths. It was not until 1939, when American geographer Paul Kosok flew over the region in a small plane, that the full extent of the lines became visible. Hundreds of kilometers of perfectly straight geometric lines, abstract figures, and enormous zoomorphic drawings. A condor with a wingspan of 130 meters, a hummingbird measuring 96 meters across, a spider 46 meters long, covering an area of approximately 450 square kilometers of desert floor. The lines were created between 500 BCE and 500 CE by the Nazca culture. The construction method is understood. The darker top layer of iron oxide-coated pebbles was cleared and piled at the edges, revealing the lighter yellowish ground beneath. The technical process of creating the lines is not the mystery. The mystery is the precision. Surveyor Joe Nickel, in a 1983 study published in the Skeptical Inquirer, demonstrated that the straight lines could be reproduced using simple tools, wooden stakes, and rope, without any aerial observation. He was correct. The straight lines are reproducible. What is not reproducible is the accuracy. The longest of the Nazca Lines runs 65 kilometers in a straight line across terrain that includes hills, valleys, and surface irregularities. The deviation from true straight over that 65-kilometer distance is less than 0.1 degrees. GPS-aided survey equipment was used to verify this in 2012. The deviation was confirmed, but here's where the standard explanation falls apart. The animal geoglyphs, the condor, the hummingbird, the spider, the monkey, are not visible as animals from any ground-level position. They are only recognizable as the animals they depict from an altitude of approximately 300 meters. This is not contested. This is confirmed by every researcher who has attempted to identify the figures from ground level. The Nazca people, using only ground-level observation, created images that are only coherent from an altitude they had no documented means of achieving. The zoomorphic figures are not simple. The condor's wing feathers are individually detailed. The spider contains an accurate depiction of the reproductive organ, visible only under magnification, a detail that would require knowledge of spider anatomy at a scale that ground-level observation does not provide. Entomologist Gerald Hawkins, who studied the Nazca spider figure in 1967, identified it as a member of the genus Ricinulae, one of the rarest spider genera on Earth, found only in deep Amazonian jungle, approximately 1,000 kilometers from the Nazca Desert. How it was identified, why it was chosen, and how it was drawn with anatomical accuracy by a desert culture remains formally unanswered. The truly disturbing aspect isn't that the lines exist. It's that after 85 years of research, no consensus explanation for their purpose has been established. Astronomical, calendar, religious ritual, water ritual, all have been proposed, none has been confirmed. The Nazca Lines are a message written at a scale that only makes sense from above, by a culture that could not see them from above. Number 5. The Voynich Manuscript. In 1912, Polish antique book dealer Wilfrid Voynich purchased a manuscript from the Jesuit library at Villa Mondragone in Frascati, Italy. The manuscript contained 240 pages of vellum covered in handwritten text in an unknown script, accompanied by elaborate illustrations of plants, astronomical diagrams, cosmological charts, and figures of naked women bathing in green liquid, connected by an elaborate network of pipes. The illustrations were detailed enough to be systematic, clearly the work of someone who believed they were communicating precise information. The text was clearly language, and it followed the statistical patterns of natural language, including word frequency distributions and syntactic structures. It was not a random cipher. It was written by someone who believed they were writing something meaningful. Carbon dating conducted at the University of Arizona in 2009 placed the vellum's creation between 1404 CE and 1438 CE. The manuscript itself is therefore genuine, 600 years old. The question is not whether it is a hoax. The question is what it says, and who wrote it, and why nobody has been able to read it. Over 100 years of serious cryptographic analysis has been applied to the Voynich manuscript. The effort includes work by United States Army and Navy codebreakers during World War II, multiple teams during the Cold War including analysts from the NSA and GCHQ, and since 2000, computational analysis by teams at University College London, Yale, the University of Toronto, and the Santa Fe Institute. The cumulative conclusion of 110 years of cryptographic effort, applied by some of the most sophisticated codebreakers in human history, is the text has not been decoded. But here's where the standard explanation falls apart. The statistical properties of the Voynich text are not consistent with any known European language or cipher system of the period. The word entropy, a measure of information density, falls between that of natural language and simple substitution ciphers. The text contains structural features identified by mathematician Jorge Stolfi in 2004 that suggest it may be written in a language with no known European parallel, possibly an agglutinative language from Central Asia or the Near East, written in a custom script developed specifically for this manuscript. There is a second possibility. The text is an extremely sophisticated constructed language, a fully developed artificial language created by a single unknown author. If so, it is 200 years earlier than any other constructed language in the historical record. The plant illustrations have been compared systematically against known European, Middle Eastern, and Central Asian botanical records. None of the plants depicted in the Voynich manuscript have been definitively matched to any identified species. The illustrations show root structures, flowering patterns, and leaf morphology in detail consistent with direct observation, but the plants themselves do not appear to exist. The manuscript is held in the Beinecke Rare Book and Manuscript Library at Yale University. It has been fully digitized and made freely available online. The world's best cryptographers, linguists, and computational analysts have access to every page. In 2019, a team from the University of Alberta claimed decipherment using AI. Their announcement was retracted within 2 weeks when independent verification failed. The Voynich Manuscript remains unread. Number 4. Göbekli Tepe. On a dusty hilltop in southeastern Turkey, 15 kilometers northeast of the ancient city of Şanlıurfa, in 1994, German archaeologist Klaus Schmidt noticed a series of T-shaped limestone pillars protruding from the surface of a wheat field. Locals had been using some of the larger stones as building material for their homes. Schmidt began excavating. What he found beneath the surface was a series of circular stone enclosures, each containing monolithic T-shaped pillars up to 5.5 meters tall and weighing up to 20 metric tons, carved with high-relief depictions of foxes, vultures, scorpions, lions, and abstract symbols. The enclosures were deliberately buried, filled with clean rubite and cemented shut, deliberately and carefully, sometime around 8000 BCE. The site was dated by radiocarbon analysis of organic material in the fill to approximately 9600 BCE. Göbekli Tepe is 11,600 years old. It predates Stonehenge by 6,000 years. It predates the Egyptian pyramids by 7,000 years. It predates the invention of writing by 6,000 years. It predates the beginning of agriculture, the cultivation of domesticated crops, by approximately 1,000 years. This is the detail that restructured the entire field of prehistoric archaeology. The accepted model of human civilization held that agriculture came first. Surplus food supported settled communities. Settled communities developed social complexity. Social complexity produced monumental architecture. The sequence was considered foundational, not a theory, but a framework as settled as the discovery that Earth orbits the Sun. Göbekli Tepe inverts it entirely. Monumental architecture existed before agriculture, before permanent settlements, before writing, before any of the preconditions that the standard model requires. But here's where the implication becomes genuinely staggering. Schmidt's excavations before his death in 2014 uncovered approximately 5% of the site. Geophysical surveys using ground-penetrating radar, published in 2020 by a team from Istanbul Technical University, identified at least 16 additional enclosures, still buried beneath the hilltop. The section excavated represents a small fraction of what exists. More than 95% of Göbekli Tepe has never been seen. The builders were, according to the standard archaeological classification, hunter-gatherers. They had no permanent settlements, no domesticated crops, no pack animals, no metal tools. They lived in bands of perhaps 150 to 200 individuals. Yet the organizational complexity required to quarry 20-ton limestone pillars, transport them from a quarry site 500 meters away, erect them in precise circular arrangements, and then, after centuries of use, carefully bury them in a controlled, deliberate fill, exceeds anything the standard model attributes to nomadic hunter-gatherer bands. There is no model that satisfactorily explains how people living in groups of 150 organize the labor required to build this. The deliberate burial is the detail archaeologists struggle with most. The enclosures were not abandoned. They were not destroyed. They were filled with clean, sorted material, a process requiring more organized effort than it would have taken to simply leave them standing. Someone made a conscious decision to bury Göbekli Tepe, to seal it, to preserve it under the earth. Whatever was happening there ended deliberately, not through collapse or abandonment. What makes this permanently unsettling is the implication for everything we haven't found. If a site of this scale, built by people who should not have been capable of it, survived 11,600 years and was only found because a farmer picked up the wrong stone, how many equivalent sites exist below the surface of the Middle East, Central Asia, and North Africa? Schmidt himself estimated that dozens of comparable sites likely remain undiscovered. None have been confirmed. One was found. It changed everything. We are still waiting for the next one. Number 3. The Indus Valley Script. Between 2600 BCE and 1900 BCE, a civilization occupied the northwestern Indian subcontinent That was, by most measurable criteria, the most advanced urban culture on Earth. The Indus Valley Civilization, also called the Harappan Civilization, covered an area of approximately 1.25 million square kilometers, making it geographically larger than ancient Egypt and Mesopotamia combined. At its height, it was home to an estimated population of 5 million people. Its two largest cities, Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa, had populations exceeding 40,000, comparable to the largest cities in ancient Mesopotamia, and larger than any contemporary European settlement. The cities were built on a grid plan. They had standardized brick sizes, a single ratio of 1 to 2 to 4 used across the entire civilization, from the smallest settlement to the largest city, separated by hundreds of kilometers. They had underground sewage systems connected to individual homes, the first documented urban sanitation infrastructure in human history. The sewage system at Mohenjo-Daro, examined by civil engineers in a 2011 study published in the Journal of Water and Health, was assessed to be more functionally sophisticated than the sewage systems of most Indian cities in 1950. The Indus Valley people had a script. It survives on approximately 4,000 inscribed objects: clay tablets, stamp seals, copper tablets, and pottery fragments. The script contains approximately 400 to 600 distinct signs. It is clearly a writing system. The sign frequencies follow Zipf's law, the same statistical distribution found in all known natural languages. It was used for administrative, commercial, and ritual purposes across the entire civilization for 700 years. It has never been decoded, not partially, not provisionally, not with scholarly debate about the correct reading. The Indus Valley script is completely unread, but here's where the silence becomes the most disturbing thing in this entire list. The Indus Valley civilization did not collapse. It underwent a gradual transition over approximately 300 years. The population dispersed. The cities were abandoned or shrank. The people migrated east and south. Their descendants are, in all probability, alive today in the populations of Pakistan, northwestern India, and Gujarat. Their genes survive. Their physiological heritage survives. Their language, possibly a precursor to the Dravidian language family, spoken today by approximately 250 million people, may survive. Their written record is sealed. In 700 years of continuous use across a civilization of 5 million people, the Indus Valley script produced no bilingual inscription, no Rosetta Stone equivalent that might allow comparison with a known language. No text is long enough to permit statistical analysis sufficient for decipherment without such a key. Every proposed decipherment since 1875, and there have been over 100 serious attempts, has been rejected by the scholarly consensus. The most recent, a computational approach using machine learning published in Science Advances in 2020, concluded that the script is consistent with a structured language but offered no translation. A civilization of 5 million people who built the world's first sewage systems, who standardized weights and measures across 1 million square kilometers, who traded with Mesopotamia and Persia, who maintained urban centers for 700 years, left us nothing we can read. Everything they believed, everything they recorded, every contract, every prayer, every administrative decree. Silent. Number 2, Puma Punku. At an elevation of 3,840 meters above sea level in the Bolivian Altiplano, near the southern shore of Lake Titicaca, the archaeological complex of Puma Punku covers approximately 2 hectares of stone blocks so precisely cut and so geometrically complex that their existence has generated more scientific controversy per square meter than almost any other site on Earth. Puma Punku is part of the larger Tiwanaku archaeological complex. Radiocarbon dating of organic material from the deepest archaeological layers places initial construction at approximately 536 CE. But here's the detail that makes Puma Punku different from every other site on this list. The stones are not large. The most famous blocks at Puma Punku weigh between 100 and 131 metric tons, significant, but within the range of Bronze Age construction. The mystery of Puma Punku is not scale. It is geometry. The H blocks, a class of precisely cut andesite stones named for their H-shaped cross-section, contain internal angles that are geometrically perfect to fractions of a degree. Not visually approximately right, measurably, verifiably, formally perfect. The interior surfaces of the H blocks contain channels with 90-degree corners cut to tolerances of less than half a millimeter. The blocks contain drill holes with smooth interior walls. The surface quality of a drilled hole indicates whether it was produced by a rotating tool or by hand percussion. The Puma Punku drill holes show surface smoothness consistent with a rotating cutting implement. The Tiwanaku culture had no iron tools. Their hardest available cutting material was bronze, which is softer than andesite. Independent material testing of andesite blocks from Puma Punku, published by Alexey Voynich of the University of California in 2018, confirmed that the andesite used in the H blocks has a hardness rating between 6 and 7 on the Mohs scale. Bronze has a hardness rating of approximately 3. A tool cannot cut a material harder than itself. But here's where the standard explanation falls apart entirely. The conventional response is abrasion, grinding harder stone with softer stone using sand as an abrasive medium. This works for surfaces. It does not work for interior right-angle corners, because no abrasive tool can access the interior corner without rounding it. The internal right angles at Puma Punku cannot be produced by abrasion. The channels cannot be produced by bronze percussion tools. The drill holes cannot be produced by hand. The cutting technology that produced Puma Punku has no confirmed equivalent in any tool assemblage from the pre-Columbian Andes. A 2019 experimental archaeology study by researchers from the Universidad Mayor de San Andrés in La Paz attempted to reproduce a single H block using the most sophisticated tool set plausibly available to the Tiwanaku culture. After 18 months of work, the team produced a block approximately matching the external dimensions of a small H block. The internal angles deviated by between 3 and 7 degrees. The interior surface quality did not match the source material. The study concluded, the technology that produced the Puma Punku H blocks is unknown. The site was damaged during the Spanish colonial period, when the blocks were used as a stone quarry for church construction in the nearby town of Tiwanaku. An unknown number of H blocks were destroyed. Whatever information the complete site might have conveyed, the arrangement, the relationships between the H blocks and the other architectural elements, was partially erased. The site that remains is the damaged remnant of something larger. We are trying to understand a sentence from which half the words have been removed. Number 1. Göbekli Tepe's deliberate burial, and what it implies. This entry is not a new site, it is the implication of one. When Klaus Schmidt began excavating Göbekli Tepe in 1995, the feature that distinguished it most sharply from every other prehistoric site he had studied was not the scale. It was the fill. The enclosures at Göbekli Tepe were not abandoned. They were not destroyed by time or weather. They were deliberately, methodically filled with clean rubite material, sorted stone, crushed bone, and cemented aggregate, packed so carefully that when Schmidt's team began excavating, the fill material was more compacted and homogeneous than any naturally deposited material. Someone filled these chambers on purpose. The deliberate burial was dated. Each enclosure was buried at a different time. The oldest enclosures, enclosures A through D, containing the largest and most elaborately carved pillars, were the first to be filled. The burial process continued across approximately 2,000 years, from roughly 10,000 BCE to 8,000 BCE. It was not a single act. It was a sustained, multi-generational project. People who were born after the oldest enclosures were sealed continued the project of sealing the newer ones. For 2,000 years, someone maintained the knowledge that Göbekli Tepe was a place that must be buried, but here's where the implication reaches into the present in the most disturbing way possible. The deliberate burial preserved the site. The carved pillars at Göbekli Tepe are in extraordinary condition because they spent 11,000 years protected under 3 meters of controlled fill. The pillars exposed at the surface, those not yet buried when the site was finally abandoned, are weathered nearly beyond recognition. The ones buried are intact. The builders of Göbekli Tepe knew how to preserve stone for an indefinite period. They chose to bury their most important work. The question is not whether they wanted it found. The question is whether they wanted it found by us. Enclosure D, the oldest and most heavily carved enclosure at the site, contains 2 central pillars. Each is 5.5 meters tall and weighs approximately 7 metric tons. The faces of the pillars are carved with interlocking symbols: a vulture, a scorpion, a headless figure, a handbag shape, abstract geometric marks. In an arrangement that researchers at the University of Edinburgh in 2017, analyzing the astronomical alignments of the pillars, concluded was a date. Their specific conclusion, published in Mediterranean Archaeology and Archaeometry, was that the central pillar carvings of Enclosure D record the date of a catastrophic comet impact. Approximately 10,950 BCE, the beginning of the Younger Dryas, the sudden 1,200-year cooling event that devastated human populations globally and may have triggered the conditions that led to the development of agriculture. If the Edinburgh interpretation is correct, and it has not been conclusively confirmed or refuted, then the builders of Göbekli Tepe were not leaving behind a religious monument. They were leaving behind a warning, a record of a catastrophe, preserved in stone, buried to protect it, at a site specifically chosen for its geological stability and elevation above the Heron Plain. The truly disturbing aspect isn't what the builders carved, it's what the act of burial implies about their understanding of time. To bury a warning is to believe someone will eventually come to read it. To maintain that burial across 2,000 years, across generations of people who never saw the original construction, is to maintain a belief that whoever comes next will need to know what happened. The next survey of Göbekli Tepe's unexcavated 95% is scheduled. The ground-penetrating radar images show additional enclosures, additional pillars, additional carvings. Whatever message was buried at Göbekli Tepe 11,600 years ago is still mostly unread. The question isn't whether someone was trying to tell us something, it's whether we are asking the right questions when we excavate. If you want to see more videos like this, click the video on screen now and make sure to subscribe.